Friends, today we celebrate the great Saint Josaphat, bishop and martyr. Saint Josaphat came from Ukraine area. He was kind of a bridge builder between the East and the West. Historically, he was associated with the Eastern Rite Christians, and his life was cut short because of the divisions he was trying to heal. There was also opposition to that reunification within the church. He was born in 1580 and lived a monastic life. He had this burning passion for unity between Eastern and the Western faith, both of the same faith, but since the 1054 schism, 400 or 500 years later, they were still quite divided. What is modern day Constantinople and Rome. Furthermore, there was a lot of church turmoil during this time. A lot of infighting and then fighting. There was not militias, but there was military presence and figures that would wage war in a sense. It was strange times. The military in the church really was military. The Crusades, for hundreds and hundreds of years, the Swiss Guards and everything that was around to protect the church. At the time, it was needed. We still feel a little bit of that with the Swiss Guards, but yeah, the Crusades and the Crusaders, that was a real thing. And St. Josaphat's life was in the middle of some of that, especially during the Council of Trent. Josaphat's witness, particularly his, he died at the hands of persecutors in a very, hostile environment for the faith. He died, he strangely sought reconciliation between the East and the West, and sadly, it led to his death. So that's why he's well loved and revered in both Western and Eastern churches. We have a basilica in our state dedicated to Josaphat, and so forth. He was the Archbishop of Polotsk, and he worked tirelessly to implement reform and unity between both sides. He had this unique way of preserving the Eastern liturgical traditions, which were also part of the fighting, because 500 years went by, and after the schism of 1054, the Eastern Rite continued to adapt and change a little bit. So 500, 600 years later, of course, the liturgies are going to be a little bit more unique and different to their culture. That was a big challenge to reunite the churches through that. So you wonder why it was so terrible or why it was so difficult for everyone to get along. Well, imagine we're trying to unify the Eastern and the Western to this day, which are still divided. And one of the cruxes of the argument, one of the things that hinge between moving on into unity and healing and reconciliation is the liturgy, where the Eastern Rite liturgies are very different than the Roman Western Rite liturgies. And imagine if, let's say, one side says, we won't unite until you accept our liturgies, etc. And the other side saying, well, we can't unite unless you accept our liturgies, or vice versa. That was one of many arguments and things that were going on that was so toxic that still to this day, 1,000 years later, we're still divided. It's very sad. So Josaphat tried to, what they refer to as, he tried to sow and unite kind of in the middle way, the middleist virtue. I think it's called the virtuous middle, to unite the two. But he just became a target, and both sides, I can't remember what led to his death, who was responsible, but hatred for him and this idea of compromise led to his martyrdom, which was about in his early 40s, 43, 44, he died in 1623. And so an angry mob actually stormed his residence, and he could have escaped, but he didn't. The mob took him, and reportedly he spoke to the mob and said, "My children, why do you wish to strike your shepherd?" It's a good question. He was only 43 years old. They shot him, beat him, and they threw him in the river. So the interesting thing about his life, the paradox, if you will, is that he became a martyr for unity. So because he was trying to unite the East and the West, that led to his death. And there was just that conflict, it actually produced further division. Because of the martyrdom, that just solidified the division even more because of the pain and the loss of Josaphat. These were the complex things going on during this time in Europe. Josaphat was a leading figure to unite the East and the West, and it backfired. It led to his martyrdom and led to further divisions. So today, St. Josaphat, his life, challenges us to reconcile. We should think about uniting ourselves with the other churches. It would be really good if we could bring Protestantism back into the faith, the universal church. I think that's a better word and term for the faith of Jesus Christ, the institution of religion that was established by the Son of God, Jesus Christ, via the apostles, St. Peter, and the apostolic succession afterwards, 2,000 years later, is called the Catholic Church. But a more appropriate word for the English translation shouldn't be Catholic. I know I might get some heat for this because it's a Greek word, not an English word. And the Greek word is Catholic with a capital K, not a C. And we borrowed that word from Greek to the English, but the word really means whole, universal, the universe. The universal church, which is a strong term both in the East and the West, and in most of our, if not, I'm not going to say all our documents and dogmas and constitutions and decrees, ecclesial, papal encyclicals, but the term universal church is more widely respected, and I think it's more unifying. Sometimes we need to rebrand, and I think maybe it's a perfect time to know. They didn't use the term in Jesus' day and age. Even for about a couple hundred years, actually, the term Catholic came about between the first and second century. It was called the Way. It was always called the Way, and then it turned into about 75, 80 years later after Christ's death, it started to be called Christianity. And then another 50, 80 years later, it's probably less, maybe 50, 60 years is a guess. I can't remember the history. There's so much history. It started to be called the Catholic Church. So, yeah, that's a bit of a history with St. Josaphat. He was trying to heal the wounds, the historical wounds of division. His feast day is celebrated today, November 12th. And it reminds us that we should always, seek unity, especially in a fragmented world. It's very relevant to his life. He was willing to die for unity by laying down his life. And so his canonization was in the 1870s. And the church, both in the Eastern and the Western church, recognize him as a bridge builder. And so pray to St. Josaphat for healing and for the unity in the church.